Thank you everybody for this podcast. This is the fifth on the series for Azad Foundation and its partner MenEngage India and NTL Network. We are doing this campaign called Ghar Ka Kaam Sabka Kaam. Within that, we are doing something called Kaam Ki Baat, and I am very happy to have Laxman, who has agreed to be part of this podcast with us, and we will have a conversation. So Laxman comes with a long experience of working in the civil society sector. He is the global co-director of MenEngage Global Alliance. Laxman also has a lot of work towards advocating for LGBTQI rights, climate justice, and social justice, and have worked with different kind of organizations, from international NGOs to UN agencies, with the governments across South Asia, Middle East, Africa, Europe, Caribbean, North America. So it's a quite hefty CV, and I'm not going to a lot of it, but I think it's a privilege to have Laxman for this conversation. So idea behind this conversation is that we all know that unpaid care work is something which becomes a very significant part of lives, but at the same time, it remains invisible when it comes to women. Neither at societal level, neither it is recognized, nor it is given the kind of respect it deserves. So I think the idea behind this campaign and this conversation is to look at how we are going to address this. I know MenEngage has done some tremendous work. So the role of MenEngage Global is also to bring all the organizations that are working, engaging with men, and so a lot of issues, including violence, care work, and various other issues that we are working with. So Laxman, can you just give us a little bit of background to our viewers about what MenEngage Global does?
Thank you, Shrinivas, and it's a pleasure to be invited, and thank you for reaching out and thinking of me to be part of this amazing series that you are organizing, very important one at the current movement. So MenEngage Alliance is a global network of civil society organizations and individuals that have come together from around 92 countries at the moment, with the common interest of this effort, what we call as transforming patriarchal masculinities and working with boys and men, with the sense that we need to bring men and boys on board in the agenda of advancing gender equality, women's rights, LGBTIQ rights, climate justice, and social justice. So what we do is to create spaces for collective learning, and that collective learning, aiming to contribute to just and equal redistribution of power, choices, and resources, where all people enjoy all forms of freedom to decide over and shape their own lives, both in private and public spheres. And that's where one of the key priority areas since the beginning of MenEngage has been to look at unpaid care work or paid care work. So one thing that what we are trying to clarify is also that achieving gender equality is not a zero-sum game. It benefits everyone. And that includes benefits that boys and men ourselves can have actually from this situation or the vision of gender equality.
So just coming back to what you have said, how do you see the work around unpaid care work? Are there any positive shifts that you are seeing, say, over the period of last 3-4 years? Or
absolutely, I think for the last, I would say 1 or 2 decades now, this work with boys and men is getting a lot of traction. However, that traction and the programs and projects still are very small scale, and in that sense, we call ourselves as an emerging field. But lately, we have become very clear, and some clear evidences and expansion of this work is coming as well. However, we must acknowledge that despite this work that's going on for over 2-3 decades now, or if you look at the feminist movement over centuries now, there is no country in the world where unpaid care and domestic work is shared equally between men and women, or starting from life cycle perspective, even for girls and boys or children with gender non-conforming identities. And women still do 3 to 10 times more labor work or care work in general than men. It is to do with deeply held norms that we learn during the time of socialization, where we understand that women are carers and men are providers, which is at the heart of this problem at all. But I think what we have also realized is that it's not, sort of, there is a trend between care work in general, whether it's paid or unpaid. Even during the COVID pandemic, for example, the care work was the least paid work in the world, though it was the most important piece in the human life, right?
Right.
So even though, the question is then, why do our economic system devalue the care work so much? But there are some positive things emerging as well. And also we must acknowledge that the unpaid care work, or care work or economies of care, is not something that we only MenEngage started. It was started way back by the feminist groups themselves. So it's a building on to the agenda that feminist groups have already been talking about, and adding the lens of, okay, what does it mean then to bring boys and men into this conversation, to look at, what does it mean for boys and men, and that inherently boys and men are human beings that have emotions, have capability to care.
Right.
And how do we inculcate that true human sense rather than sticking to this stereotype? For the last decade, I would say at the least, significant number of men and boys are interested in this agenda way more than before. So we have managed to create a number of networks around this. For example, MenEngage India in case of India, and MenEngage Global in case of MenEngage Global Alliance. Similarly, there are other campaigns such as Men Care campaign. There are, caring campaign going on in the US as well. In addition, the significant interest also has been at the policy level. So there have been amazing policy level changes happening around the world as well. And we can come back to that later on.
What do you think the biggest barrier, be it cultural or economic or institutional, which somewhere inhibits men's involvement in care work? What are the key, I would say, stumbling block that stops men to be a caregiver?
Absolutely. There are many. I think, it cuts across all the cultural, economic, or any kinds of institutional arrangements. And there are many barriers for men's meaningful. And what we have also started talking about is accountable involvement in recognizing, reducing, and redistribution of care work in general, or, redefinition or reformulation of what we call the economies of care, so that we can also address this capitalist underpinning of our whole economic system that is very, very patriarchal and masculine. So yeah, that's at the broader level, right? But if you go down to the specifics, it starts with the gender socialization of children itself, right? So then thereby bringing forward the parenting, the cultural aspects about raising children and kids, and how children are groomed to believe on a certain norms and their roles and responsibilities. Then connected to that is the education system itself as a whole. And we need to look into how education system is also feeding into that same stereotypes and so on. Connected to that is capitalism, as I said in the beginning as well. The whole setup of how economic systems are built is, sort of reinforcing the same challenging narratives about men's involvement, which is devalued, which is considered feminine, and so on, which then connects with also the colonial history and values installed in our part of the world. And if you look at, some of the pieces around the roles, the gender norms also has a lot to do with colonial mindset and what colonization did, and how that also installed this so-called family values and norms, right? And that on in itself is a problematic cultural paradigm we live with. And then again, connected to that is cultural or religious norms, and the interpretation of religion in a way that keeps on reinforcing these patriarchal stereotypes about, men are supposed to be doing this, women are supposed to be doing this, and this segregation that happens is part of the problem. And then connected to that, which is again a broader institutional framework, is then the national and international laws and policies, where we see legal paradigms or legal frameworks or institutions that are supposed to be implementing those legal frameworks have built around the same stereotypes, and thereby creating much of a barrier when men start involving in any caregiving work is supposed then sort of ridiculed as if it is not something that men should be involved in. And I think you discussed that with Satish in one of your initial podcasts on how men are ridiculed when men are start involving in caregiving work. Men and boys who have actually been involved in caregiving role have higher level of happiness, higher level of satisfaction, and amazing level of relationships with their family members as well. So which kind of counters to this devaluation that is there around the care work. Sometimes I tell people to look at the old family members in their own home. If I reflect by my grandparents, for example, or even if I currently look at my own father, I see a different level of approach or the role he now plays when he's now old, which wasn't there before. And I see his bonds more, emotional attachment more and more with the grandchildren, which I never used to see. So that tells us the story that men in their certain age period might follow that stereotypes, but somewhere within there is that urge and need for emotional connection and care. And because they were not able to do that role or play that role, that is now spilling over in the relationship with their grandkids.
Right. A very interesting thing that you have shared. Actually, at many times at that age, men often are not the principal provider. So then that brings me to a question that, is it that if a man is playing the role of a provider, then he cannot be a caregiver? So I think, does masculinity plays a role in that? I mean, does it inhibits men to be both at the same time? So is it they can't coexist? But the fact is they do coexist. Does masculinity play a role in that?
Masculinities or the masculine norms that we are socialized with as boys and men are at the bedrock of why we are not able to or we are not inclined to take on the role of caregiving. These young men do have an internal urge to have emotional connections with their children. The reason why we have realized they are not opening up are two. One is that this provider role is absolutely a very heavy role. And there is this internal or psychological pressure of being a good provider then becomes such a time-consuming phenomena in the lives of young men that they can't take other burden of care or or be involved in caregiving. It's more to do with their own understanding that they can't be emotional, they can't be having emotional attachment with the others. But in the programs, we have seen drastic level of change in young men as well, really coming forward, taking on caregiving role. So the point is they do exist, but the norms that is set as in terms of the provider, which is connected with masculinities, then becomes a barrier to that. But also, what lately I've been thinking about, Shrinivas, is that when I talk with your old people, when I then, ask them, or even if they are primary providers, even they are older ages, they do spend a lot of time on caregiving and building relations rather than going out with friends or spending evenings outside of the home. As a man, they are supposed to be the providers. Do they want, after their retirement or their whatever phase they are in, do they want to go back to the role of being a provider? And in most cases, they are not interested to go back to the role of provider because they feel it's so heavy and it really doesn't allow them to be who they are.
So I think it is entirely possible that there is a significant amount of work that needs to be done also with men, that women can be provider and you can be a caregiver. We need to continue to challenge this, that the care work is about women's rights. It's not really about women's rights. It's also about the well-being of the men. If men are engaged in caregiving, then it mentally, psychologically, emotionally make them far more available and reduces a lot of risk. But why still somehow we have not made the kind of progress? Does institutions play such a significant role that at certain level it's becomes really difficult for men?
Absolutely. So all the institutions that I was referring before
Yeah.
about whether it's a family institution or it's a religious institution or education institution, all of them are shaped by this very stereotypical norms and value system. That creates a certain level of understanding or level of or misunderstanding about what the role of boys and men should look like. So all of that do play a lot of challenges, and also to realize the fact that these norms are not very binary in terms of, oh, women would have egalitarian and men would have non-egalitarian, right? It is to do with our own societal paradigm where these norms do cut across all the identities that we live with. And then the market or the job market or the economic sector is framed or created in a way that doesn't allow or is welcomes women and gender non-conforming individuals to be more and more involved in some of these pieces. So that becomes an exclusionary barrier for women and girls to be involved in. And that is where it becomes really important when do this work with boys and men. It cannot just be working with men to bring them in the household work or within the household, but that should accompany with initiatives where boys and men can then take on role to create these public and the social spaces to in a way that can be welcoming for women and girls as well. Actually, if you historically look at, and that is one of the key area that women's rights movement have been looking into and asking for, and that's where the role work with boys and men has not been enough. So we need to look at that aspect very much as well when we look at working with boys and men.
So, very interestingly, from your what you just said, that the market plays a very significant role, and because there is also what we call it the lack of gendered infrastructure. So, if women were to come out and work, there are things that needed like washrooms, like childcare facilities, like working women hostels and all that. And somehow state has a bigger responsibility. State also cannot absolve themselves from the responsibility, while market players also have the responsibility. Are they not understanding that it's important for them to be a player in this and move a needle somewhere, or it is just that they just don't care?
See, what we need to understand is that whether it is market or the nation state building, all of these are highly patriarchal institutions. And by virtue of itself, inherently, they are sexist. And that becomes a major barrier. And many of these institutions are led by men who have not given a thought on some of these areas. And I think one of the reasons why this is also to do with is that the paid work, which is meant for women, is very low paid as well. And it is by structure, by design, to be more exclusive for the work that is meant to be or supposed to be done by women, or feminine work, which is always has been devalued, right? And the decision makers mostly have been men themselves, and thereby reinforcing this patriarchal notions. And that's where this lack of even understanding of what needs to happen at the structural level or at the market level, that understanding is not there, is because that these institutions are inherently patriarchal. And that's where the work with boys and men and the work with fatherhood and needs to go beyond just very individual behavioral change work with boys and men, to also connect that with systems change as well, what we call, but also, lately there has been increasingly, sort of increased understanding on how this work around care work or economies of care might also revolve into structural transformation as well. And there are two key challenges in making structural changes in men's involvement in care. One is this structural element of policy production and public life are already very quite patriarchal and masculine. And then second is that men's activity in domestic social production space remains really, really low. And that informs what happens in the market as well, because we can't segregate what happens in the family paradigm or institution from the government or the market institution. They are part of the same spectrum. And I think, that's where I think some of the advocacy work that we have been involved in, and particularly, within the men care work, is that the parental leave work or the advocacy, which is becoming a major advocacy piece in the work that we are doing, has to do with not only paternity leave but a parental leave. And I think we need to be careful, those of us who are doing the advocacy in these spaces, not to be so gendered binary in our advocacy itself. It's not about men or father or mother that reinforces gender binary in some ways. Even in our part of the world, in South Asia, for example, there is not even maternity leave. So what is the point of advocating for parental or paternity leave? And if you look at the culture that we live in, even if a man gets the paternity leave, well, the question then is whether the man itself is, do we have that culture or a system where men is welcomed to be playing that role of caregiver?
Right.
Because only changing behaviors is not going to change this, transform the whole system, nor only looking at policies will transform the system. So they need to go both hand in hand, thereby installing a national level institutional frameworks that redefine certain norms that we live with, and particularly address these masculine ideals around men's involvement in care work and the barriers around it is a must.
Yeah. I think, you are right, because, I was also having a conversation very recently in, say, UP or in most of the northern India. It is prevalent that men should not be taking care of babies. It's the women's job. Men would, if they want to play with the baby, is happy and all, you can have a baby, but once starts crying or does potty and all, then it's women's job. So I think these kinds of cultural norms also needs to be challenged. Also, there are a lot of issues with social security. I mean, a lot of women, actually, even when they work, they are mostly in what we call it unorganized sector, not so much in the formal economy. What are the ways you think we can challenge this? And if you see some positive examples, I mean, in South Asian context, I'm saying, because here we see a lot of challenge as well. So where you see a ray of hope, the programs, if you have seen, which are actually addressing some of these barriers.
No, there are quite some interesting initiatives being taken forward in number of countries. There was a program in Maharashtra by some of our members. The program was about really working with fathers in the communities. They had this very comprehensive framework to mobilize men at a systems change level. So the entry point was working with fathers to involve them in care work and support women or children at home. And in Maharashtra, an interesting result that it led to was not only men started being, fair shareholders in household work, but they really were supporting women to be more actively involved in public. So they were supporting women to be, going for election. They were supporting women to be in more public spaces more and more, while they to take the responsibility of care work at household level. And they started, and then that also resulted into some of the men also handing over the ownership of their land to women. Obviously there was a factor within that to we need to be mindful of, and that relates to the system change piece, is that there was an affirmative action in Maharashtra by when they transfer the ownership of the land is by the women, the tax was slightly lower than what it would have been for situation it was owned by men. So that also became a factor. So we need to look at these multiple levels of factors that can actually energize or bring positive change in the way we think about. So similarly, there are a number of programs in Philippines, and Oxfam did this We Care program that really did a campaign which led to changes in local laws, ordinance, and they were working with local mayors, authorities, to bring about this some systemic change as well. And then there was also this work done in Palestine by the NGO Development Center, where there was positive approach to work with communities on unpaid care work. And what they did was they worked with local chief and community leaders to then work with married couple and in university students. And then that really was a very peer-to-peer approach, where men were talking with other men. that actually resulted into some of this work. Too, there has been some, South Africa, for example, the work done by our colleague, members, Sonke and Mosaic, they work with trade unions to install this, sort of the legal change that happened for paternity leave in South Africa that resulted into, recognizing paternity leave. So summing that up in terms of what exactly our advocacy should look like in terms of the parental leave is, and what have come out to be proven, also learning from the Scandinavian countries, is that our policy solutions should also look at promoting public services and social protection policies. Also, then to look at redistributing care work from poorer household to the state by financing, providing, and regulating care services at all levels. Our key learning is that these leaves should be non-transferable and adequate in length. The non-transferable piece comes in, which we need to discuss sometime later, Shrinivas, is this the pay gap that exists? Because for the same role, men are highly paid and women are less paid. So then if between the two of them, if they have to choose who is going to be taking the parental leave, obviously then everyone will choose the one that is earning the most. Then that obviously defaults to men, right?
Yeah.
So we need to look at some of those paradigms and also increase government uptake on programs and campaign that seek to transform societal norms about caring, including through institutionalizing education and healthcare system. And the last is that promoting family-friendly policies in private sector.
Yeah, I think it's very useful. And also, I'm just wondering, how do you see the role of media in all that? How do we as a civil society need to engage more with the market and media to build far more awareness, far more clear, bringing that narrative?
Absolutely. Media is such an important piece in all of this. And that's why some of our programs apply this campaigns approach that then relates to use of media, working with media to recreate a narrative that is more positive or that is more supportive of men's involvement in caregiving role, but also clarify. So definitely a lot of work needs to happen with media to come out with some new narratives around men's role in caregiving. And I've seen in India, there have been a number of instances where some brands have picked up some very interesting approach to showcasing the narratives as well, and that have been really effective as well. But I think the challenge still is that for these media houses, it's all about getting traction and earning money.
Yeah.
And what that then defaults to is that men control the economic system. So media by default then, sort of promoting norms and narrative that solves to the interest of men, which is to reinforce patriarchy. I was talking about gender socialization earlier. And a lot of norms that young men and boys learn these days is not from what happens in the family or parents. A lot is informed by what happens in social media, because young people these days are always in social media, on online platforms, and the norms that they learn from there, which is not really helpful. We have been discussing for a while about this How to Talk with Men campaign. The idea of that campaign is to recraft the narrative of what, the patriarchal narrative have been there. So I think we need to be really becoming really innovative in terms of recreating more positive narratives. And I'm happy that, at least Azad, you guys are doing amazing work in having this conversation. A caveat to that, though, Shrinivas, which we have been realizing lately, is that there is also a phenomena that is happening with a danger that the work on care will be co-opted by many parenting and family programs springing up worldwide and that are funded by right-wing organizations and movements. We see that happening even in country like US right now. Look at what the narratives is that men's responsibility is to be the provider, women's role is to produce more babies, stay at home, and the language they are using is the language that some of us used to use as well in our programs on fatherhood, which kind of reinforces the nuclear gender binary family with one father, one mother approach, in which father is the provider, right? So I think by adopting the terminologies that we used in the care, these bodies promote an understanding of family as exclusively heteronormative and gender stereotypical understanding of what gender is supposed to be, right? So we need to bring back some of those conversations and own those conversations and be bold about these conversations more. And media is such a platform that we need to use more and more for the work we are doing. So absolutely.
Yeah. So I think, as you said, maybe we also need to master social media. How do we put our narrative these days? I mean, the young boys and girls are more looking at 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes reel. How do we communicate that message within the 2 to 3 minutes is also something which I think a lot of us who have been dealing with the conventional way of working in media and all needs to probably learn to do better on that, I guess. There is the world we live in is now full of, we call it dominant alpha male kind of a leadership that we have. A lot of it to moving towards the conservatism, and also there is a lot of backlash that we see towards the progressive ideas. So in next 3 to 5 years, what are the 3 to 4 priorities that you see for all those organizations in India or elsewhere who are working and engaging with men? They need to be strategically choosing those things.
No, absolutely. That's a great question. One very urgent thing right now that we need to really focus on is to focus on children and young people. The reason I believe that is quite very important piece of work is we need to interrupt at a moment in humans' life when these norms are being shaped and installed and structured. And that is when the young people are growing to internalize, but also reshape these understandings and value systems in their own terms. The most strategic piece that we need to, from a programmatic level, is to reach out and engage young people more and more. That is one. Second is that we need to create spaces for narrative building, that we need to counter to this stereotypical narrative that is more and more becoming stronger these days. And I think the challenge has been that those working in this field, are not coherent in the messages we have. So we need to come together and provide a bit more coherent message. Somewhere we need to be coherent at a structural level on the messaging we are putting out there. And we need to be coming together as a community. Those who do this work on transforming masculinities in the best possible way as of now, as we understand at the moment, is a very small community. And we have to come together as a community to support each other. The other is about collective advocacy. And we do need to engage collectively in advocating for progressive policy change as well. So that's an important piece as well. And then another thing we are recently realizing is what is called evidence. Evidence, as we see some pieces or learning that are supporting to bring about certain level of results or the impacts that we see in the field, but doing that in a bit more of a non-academic and accessible manner that can then be used in the advocacy work we need to be doing. And that's one of the challenges is the scaling up of the programs, because we have realized that there are some very amazing innovative programs happening, but at a very small scale. When we say scale up, we don't mean copy and pasting a particular program in one context to the other. What we are saying is, by virtue of being part of this coalition or a community, we exchange and share, and then we collaborate with organizations in different localities to join hands and come together in expanding this learning. We need to walk the talk of caregiving, not only in our programs, but among ourselves also, as activists as well. Right. So that it becomes a culture, caring as a culture on itself. So yeah, those are some of the pieces we have realized lately that we really need to prioritize more and more. Last point, sorry, is that when we do this work, we really need to do this in accountability frame, within the accountability standards that we have set. Because as I said in the beginning, this work of caregiving or economies of care originally was started a lot also by feminist movements. And our work need to then be accountable to the feminist principles and social justice movements as well, so that we also connect with that discourse, so that we are part of the broader feminist movement and join hands together. And that is really, really a important piece to remember.
Wow, wonderful. I mean, the way you have brought this all pieces together. I completely agree with you. There is a lot of work that needs to be done by all of us. Just before we wrap up, any message that you have for this campaign, Ghar Ka Kaam, Sabka Kaam?
My message is that I think this work is absolutely crucial in overall work on transforming gender norms, because every gender norm starts within the household and again relates to the gender division of labor and care work. And one thing that I keep on saying to individual men as well is that we are actually born to be caregivers as humans. There is a longing within, wherever, take a moment to reflect on our own need. My need is affection, love, all the time.
Yeah.
Because of the way I am socialized as men, I'm not able to express that. But
Right.
inside me, I always long, and that is what I have realized after talking with millions of men and boys around the world.
Yeah.
All that human sentiment of longing, love, care, and affection is within men as well, as much as it is supposed to be or idealized to be within women, right? And I think if we are better to sell this emotion, programs can be really, really effective as well. So let us also get away from this very traditional mechanical approach of project, make it more of human program, and talk more with women's rights movements as well in our countries, so that we can connect and also learn from some of the works that women's rights movement have done. And also that let's also not get stuck into this very gendered binary approach to our programming, that when we say working on transforming patriarchal masculinities, it's not only about biological men, right? The whole problem of gender norms is that entanglement on bodies, right? That is how the norms are set, and that's the root of the problem. And the last point is that all of the programs that we do with boys and men, they are part of the spectrum. They are not very isolated programs, because men's life, as others humans' life, don't work in silos. Our work is more complex, our lives are more complex, and hence our programs need to be able to capture and address these different pieces and the intersections that we live with. So thereby, when we work on issues of fatherhood, that only should not be about being good father, but that should be about men taking on responsibility to talk about prevention of violence, to talk about women's bodily autonomy, to talk about LGBTIQ rights. And all of these are connected issues. They can't be isolatedly looked at, because that's how human lives are. So connect more and more with other programs and bring about other, connect more with other issues as well.
Yeah. Beautiful message. And as you said, empathy and care is such an important aspect. I mean, programs will come and go, but once you connect at a human level and with empathy and care, I think it goes a long way. And as Gandhi said, be the change that you want to see. So I think with that, thank you so much, Laxman, for such a wonderful conversation. And we look forward to continue to collaborate, engage, and so happy that you have got this much of time for us to have this conversation with us.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. And thank you for inviting me in this very important initiative that you have. And I wish all the best that this initiative becomes super successful.